Greetings, Pathfinders, and welcome back to the Absalom Archives, and to the town of Sandpoint. Please take a moment to see yourselves as we see you. Today we're taking a look at a single city, the town of Sandpoint. We're doing this for two reasons. Reason one is that Sandpoint is where the adventure path Rise of the Runelords starts, so it's important to go over it in detail. The second is because Sandpoint will go on to be important in several other adventures. So, giving you a good idea of what it's like now in 4707 will give us a greater appreciation for how things change. As I've said before, you can't know where you're going till you know where you've been. So let's first take a look at where we've been with the history of Sandpoint, the Light of the Lost Coast. Now, if you watched the recent Varesia video, you'll already be familiar with most of Sandpoint's history. There's a few more fine details to go over, and also I'm a wordy bitch that loves to type, so we're gonna run over it again. And if you haven't watched that video, this is all new to you anyway, so, have fun with it. Also, a few spoiler and trigger warnings for things going forward. This video is going to have some spoilers for the background of Rise of the Runelords, and some hints at things in the Adventure Path Jade Regent. For triggers, we'll be discussing miscarriage and some themes of parental abuse at the time on the screen now. The information here will primarily come from Rise of the Runelords Anniversary Edition, with some supplementary sources from a few other books. Sandpoint's origins lie in the south, in the city of Magnamar. The death of Aerodin and the civil war that followed in Cheliax caused a growing sense of unease in the colonists settling Varesia. In the city of Korvosa, whose government was heavily aligned with Cheliax, a large number of citizens started wondering if this was maybe not such a good thing. And when the house aligned with Hell won the war and started retconning history in retaliation, that sentiment ramped up. The result was a large number of Korvosan citizens packing up and heading out. While a few went to outlying towns or off to other nations, many of them made their way to Magnamar. And as cities grow, their needs grow too. Food from farms, raw construction material, space for people to live, and a dozen more things on top of that. So at some point in the early 4660s, a decision was made to found a town farther north along the coast, near what appeared to be the ruins of an old lighthouse. Now, founding a town is expensive, and governments often don't like to pay for things if they don't have to, so they went looking for investors. 4 merchant families in Magnamar wanted to get in on this, and rather than compete against each other, decided to combine their efforts. And that's the birth of the Sandpoint Merchants League. Let's take a look at these 4 families, shall we? First up, we have the Deverins. Their family was largely concerned with farming and brewing, both of which are very important to frontier life and setting up new towns. Obviously, people need to eat, but alcohol is actually important in these situations too. It has a variety of non-drinking uses, and keeps better for storage than water does if you need that. Plus, it's easier to keep laborers in hard conditions happy if you can let them have plenty of alcohol to lighten that load. The Scarnettis were more concerned with the other thing growing in the region, trees. As a logging family, they would be needed to both clear any land needed for farming, as well as provide timber for housing. They also synergized with the trade of the third family, the Valdemars. The Valdemars were shipbuilders who could make use of Sandpoint's coastal location and abundant timber for their trade. Their carpentry knowledge would also be important to build houses and mills and a variety of other structures around the new town. Lastly, we have the Kaijitsus, whose name probably strikes you as a little different from the other 3. That's because they are Tian immigrants who migrated over the crown of the world. They originally settled in Brinewall, but the quality of their glasswork impressed the lords of Magnamar quite a bit. These lords sent the head of the family, Rokuro Kaijitsu, an invitation to become part of Magnamar's aristocracy. Rokuro accepted and moved to the city with his wife, where his son was born and his business thrived. Sandpoint being near the coast means it's rich in sand, seaweed, and salt-resistant plants, which are apparently really important reagents in making glass, so you learn something new every day. So as you can see, these 4 families not only didn't compete with each other, they synergized in many ways. Working together, it would be pretty easy to come together and build a town at the selected site. All they had to do was sail up the coast in 4666, land on their chosen spot, and get to work. So, when they got there and found a Varesian settlement already waiting, all set up and existing, that really threw a wrench in their plans. Now, the Sandpoint Merchants League weren't monsters. They didn't want to just slaughter these people, but they did still want the land. And so negotiations started. Promises were made to provide the Varesians a place of prosperity in the new township. We don't know the exact terms, but we do know the Varesians weren't biting even after a week of negotiation. It was at this point a man named Almon Scarnetti got a genius idea. Hey, why aren't we using murder? Now obviously he was aware that wholesale slaughter would be looked down upon by his partners, but if, say, a random group of wild goblins just happened to rampage through the Varesians and kill all of them, well, I mean, that's such a tragedy. You probably don't want to stay here anymore with all that tragedy that just happened. So, we'll just take the space off your hands. No need to thank us. We got this. Now, he didn't have a convenient pack of goblins to throw at them, so he decided to use the next best thing, his drunken family members. Now, if this sounds recklessly overconfident, you're obviously not drunk enough for the plan. Drink more liquor and it will all make perfect sense. Jokes aside, the Scarnettis did attack the Varesians in a drunken attempt at a massacre, and it did end in tragedy. 5 Varisians ended up dead before the attackers were driven off, with 3 of them captured. Instead of speeding up the process by ending negotiations, Almond Scarnetti had just entirely tanked them. Good job. The Merchants League fled back to Magnamar and spent the next several months dealing with the consequences of Alamon's reckless homicide. Had they been in Corvosa, the situation likely would have been resolved quite differently, but Magnamar had both a more democratic court system and a better relationship between the city and the native Varisians. The Varisian Council is a Magnamaran political body that exists to make sure the city doesn't infringe on the rights and traditions of the Varisian people. Their support for the injured parties meant that the Merchants League had a difficult situation on their hands, with the Varisian Council demanding blood payment from all 4 families. After months of legal back and forth, the High Council of Magnamar was able to declare the matter settled with the help of Alma Deverin, whose negotiation skills were able to save the Sandpoint project. She appeased the Varisian Council by offering a generous share of Sandpoint's profits over the next 40 years as repayment, as well as promising to incorporate Desna worship into the town's planned cathedral. Roughly 1 year later, construction on the town began in earnest. The agreement with the Varisian Council was set to expire this year, actually, in 4707 if my math is correct, but a deal was struck to extend that for another 20 years. Some locals are grumbling about continuing to lose out on their profits for another 20 years, but nothing loud enough to endanger the deal has come out. Since its founding, Sandpoint has thrived along the Lost Coast. Laborers and workers from Magnamar and Riddleport have flocked to the town for abundant jobs and a cozy atmosphere. Varisian caravans also stop by frequently to visit the cathedral and conduct trade, as well as meet family members who've settled in the city. It had a pretty sleepy atmosphere until about 5 years ago, when an event the townsfolk call the Late Unpleasantness began. There are 2 main events that people refer to when they discuss the Late Unpleasantness, but there are a few more connected events in the town as a whole that they are all unaware of. This includes the source of the Late Unpleasantness, something the town is completely unaware of buried deep in its foundations. High in the Kodar Mountains, events transpired to awaken Karzug, the Rune Lord of Greed. His stirring also activated several Thessalonian artifacts, which had a cascading effect as similar artifacts responded to the actions of each other. For our history, what we care about are the Rune Wells. These magical items store the soul energy of people who exhibit the sin they are most clearly linked to and use that energy as a power source. In Thassalon's time, they powered a variety of things, but without that infrastructure in place, they mostly just vent energy into the surroundings. And since that energy is suffused with the associated sin, it makes people act on impulse related to that sin. Now, the Lost Coast wasn't always a coast. During Thassalon's time, it was actually close to the border of 2 territories, Bakrakhan, the realm of wrath, and Shalas, the realm of greed. A Sandpoint would have actually been on the Bakrakhan side of that border, so it makes sense that below it in a buried catacomb is a rune well of wrath. It's there for a reason we'll get into later, but for now just know that when Karzug woke up in 4702, the Rune Well of Wrath reacted in response. It flared and sent its psychic soul energy into the surroundings, giving people strange dreams and driving them to act more in line with the Sin of Wrath. That Rune Well would have some effect on everyone in town, but would dramatically affect 3 people, one of which is very well known, the other 2 less so, though their actions are still felt in Sandpoint 5 years later. Let's cover the known one first, with the tale of Jervis Stute. Now, if you saw the Varisia video, you'll know the basic story already, but I need to take the time to correct a few facts from there because I got the timeline just a little bit mixed up, so I want to set it straight. Jervis Stute lived in Sandpoint for quite a while, at least several years before 4687, when he stated his intention to build a home on a small tidal island just outside of town. By then, he had made himself known around town for creating intricate, detailed carvings of birds on wooden surfaces. These birds, colloquially called stutes, were highly prized among the citizens of Sandpoint for their meticulous work and artistic quality. Stute never took commission or request, he only stated he was freeing the birds trapped in the wood or something similar like that. So having one was considered a high mark for your home or business. Stute's obsession with birds would turn sinister when he found a statue on the beach with the head of a bird and the body resembling a man. This statue was of the demon lord Pazuzu, and the demonic bird whispered to Stute, turning him slowly towards madness and dark desire, spending more and more time secluded on his island. Unknown to the town, the rock he built his home on was a secret shrine to Pazuzu. As time went on, he communed more and more with the statue, falling deeper and deeper into its sway, until one night he finally broke through to the shrine beneath its house the statue had been leading him towards. Stute descended down to the depths and emerged as the Chopper, Sandpoint's most notorious serial killer. Now here's where I made my original mistake. The timeline here is a little ambiguous and I erred on the side of caution, believing that Stute had spread his next action out over the course of years. Upon further research, all his more dramatic actions took place entirely in 4702. I apologize for the earlier misinformation. Anywho, the rune well activating was the tipping point for Stute, who'd been spending more and more time secluded on his island as the years wore on. That year, the Chopper would kill 25 people in Sandpoint, including the town sheriff Casp Averton. That last one is what got Stute caught, since the sheriff was able to wound him before they died. When the trail of blood led back to Stute's home, the town rushed to save the beloved carpenter from the Chopper's deadly embrace, and were horrified to find a hole in the floor leading down to a grisly altar. Stute had taken his own life in front of the shrine, which was decorated with parts of his victims. This shook the people of Sandpoint to their core. They destroyed the shrine, buried the cave, burned Stute's house to the ground, then cremated him on the beach for good measure. All of his carvings were destroyed, their beauty tainted by the memory of the man that had created them. Sandpoint does its best to forget Jervis Stute, but the legacy of the Chopper still haunts the town. The Sandpoint didn't have long to recover before a second tragedy struck. The Sandpoint Cathedral was burned to the ground, with cleric Ezakian Tobin and his adopted daughter Nualia inside, both of them perishing in the flames. Or so the town believed. Nualia Tobin was born an Empyrean Nephilim, aka an Azamar for you pre-remaster folks. We don't know much about her birth parents, but she was taken in by Ezakian Tobin at a young age and raised in Sandpoint. Her celestial heritage was seen as a blessing from Desna herself to the town. Nualia was a sacred child, full of ethereal beauty and grace. Her smile could bring good luck, her touch could relieve pain and cure disease, you could use a lock of her hair to brew curing tea. She was destined to lead the town to prosperity and righteousness. Can you imagine how all that would sound to a child? How isolating it would have been for every other child to treat you differently? How much pressure you'd feel from adults who are coming up to you and expecting your touch to heal them, demanding bits of your hair to cure their warts or whatever? Nualia grew up a very lonely, isolated girl. Ezakian Tobin didn't exactly help matters much. He viewed his guardianship over Nualia as a holy calling, proof of his own righteousness. He planned her future out extensively, wanting her to join the Church of Desna as a pure maiden at some kind of prestigious convent. Now, the thing that kind of gets me is that Desna's church doesn't really have any tenets related to that kind of thing. She's the goddess of stars and travel. There's nothing in her common worship about virginal purity. What I'm saying is, Father Tobin wasn't the best dad and had his own idea of things that didn't always line up with how they really should have been. Nualia would suffer a tragic heartbreak at the hands of Delic Viscanta, a young Varisian boy who came into her life and swept her off her feet. Their love was a forbidden and secret thing, with Nualia sneaking away from the church at night to meet with him in ancient tunnels that ran under Sandpoint. These meetings turned physical pretty quickly, and Nualia discovered she was pregnant. Delic took the news with him to Magnamar when he fled town, afraid of the consequences. And when Father Tobin found out, he reacted poorly. He locked Nualia in the church and demanded she pray to Desna for forgiveness, which again I will point out isn't something Desna really cares about all that much. But there is another goddess that cares quite a lot about lost souls and the birth of children. When the runewell flared beneath the town, Nualia's own bottled-up anger flared in response to it, sending her into a frenzy. She went into labor and miscarried, the child horribly deformed. What she and Delic didn't know was that the tunnels where they'd had their meetings hosted an ancient shrine to Lamashtu, and the Mother of Monsters does not bring pretty births or easy ones. Her foul influence had seeped into Nualia, making her child a fiendish monstrosity. The stress and realization shocked Nualia to her core, and she slipped into a coma. A side note, I did also slip up with the timeline in the Varisia video, so if anything in this one sounds like it contradicts that one, this is the primary source. During her coma, Nualia received dreams and visions from Lamashtu. They fed on her newly unleashed rage, urging Nualia to break free from this town that had caged her in, to take revenge on the people who'd manipulated her into this situation. Through these dreams, Nualia started to see her heritage as a curse, a horrible blight on her life that had caused all this. The heavens gave a curse, but from the abyss, Lamashtu offered a gift instead. Nualia awoke from her coma, determined to destroy the people that harmed her. She barricaded Father Tobin's door, lit the church on fire, and fled into the night. The town of Sandpoint believes she died in the fire with Father Tobin, but she had fled to Magnamar, intent on tracking down Delic to deliver him an update on her life at the end of the sharpest thing she could find. We'll go over what happened with her in another video, but just know that Delic is definitely dead and he definitely had it coming. Nualia is one of my favorite characters in Pathfinder lore even to this day because of the spin she puts on so many well-known tropes. A child blessed by the celestial planes is supposed to be a paragon of good, the town's beloved darling. But Nualia explores the darker prospects of that idea, how a child might react to the situation, that kind of pressure. Like I said, we'll catch up with Nualia again in a future video, but for now know that she's out there plotting more revenge. So Nualia was the second person the Runewell influenced, but what about the third? Well, for that, we need to talk about one of the founding families of Sandpoint, the Kaijitsus. Longiku Kaijitsu was the son of Rokuro Kaijitsu, born in Magnamar and raised both there and in Sandpoint. When Longiku was older, Rokuro thought it was time to share their family's secret legacy, still hidden in the settlement of Brianwall. They traveled there together in 4687, and only Longiku returned, having washed up on shore after a storm sunk all 3 ships he'd sailed with. The entire settlement of Brianwall was wiped out around the same time, but Longiku has never shared anything about what happened. Longiku would continue running the glassworks in Sandpoint, along with forming a family with his wife Atsui. In 4686, she would give birth to a son, and he was obviously not Lanjiku's. The child, Suto, was an Ivaran, meaning Lanjiku's wife had clearly cheated on him with some elf. This is a slight that would haunt the man for years, turning him very bitter. He and his wife had another legitimate child in 4689. This daughter would be named Amiko, and while Lanjiku would treat her differently, it was still a harsh life for the young girl. He would later repay his wife's affair with his own at some point in the future, fathering a child in Magnamar named Amaya by a Chelish woman. Lanjiku's children will be important to our lore later for many, many reasons, but for now it's him we're focusing on. Lanjiku Kaijitsu was not a nice man, nor did he have that much reason to be angry with his wife in my opinion. Yeah, she cheated on him, but he did the same to her, and we don't know much about their married life. But we do know which of them killed the other, and I tend to put my sympathy with not a murderer most of the time. So Lanjiku killed Atsui the night the Runewell flared to life, as a result of his long-standing rage over her infidelity. Specifically, he pushed her from the railing of the family home's back porch, where she fell to her death. The remote location of their house and the potentially suicidal nature of her death meant that Lanjiku got away clean, no one in town suspecting him of a thing. His son Suto had some suspicions, but no proof. The Kaijitsu family is pretty impactful to the lore going forward, so just keep them in mind for now. The Runewell didn't go quiet after this flare, but it never put out the same amount of power after that. For the next 5 years, Sandpoint would have a few more moments of flaring tempers and harsh words, but nothing so striking as what we saw in 4702. Over the next 5 years, people would rebuild and heal, trying to put that past behind them. Now in 4707, the town prepares to bless its newly rebuilt cathedral with a town festival. So now we've caught up to the present day. Sandpoint in 4707 is getting ready for the Swallowtail Festival, where it will bless the new cathedral and hopefully put the town on the path to prosperity. So it's time to take a look at the town itself and see what there is to see in the light of the Lost Coast. Sandpoint is located right on the coast of the Arcadian Ocean, in the southern portion of Varesia. The town itself is divided into 2 districts, Uptown and Downtown. Uptown is the northern portion of the town, sitting on a small bluff that overlooks the rest of Sandpoint. Uptown is a lot more open, with wider streets and fewer residents. Downtown is the middle and south portion of the town, much more crowded streets and newer construction. The south side of town is home to the Sandpoint Harbor, where the Tarandarok River flows into the ocean. Across the harbor are 4 manor houses belonging to the founding families of Sandpoint, set aside from the rest of the town. 2 bridges cross the river, Tanner's Bridge to the north and Sandpoint Bridge to the south, allowing access to the road heading south into Magnamar. A gate blocks the northern entry into the town, which leads into the hinterlands surrounding Sandpoint. Starting at Uptown, we have 2 major landmarks. The first is a small island inaccessible without climbing or flight. Once it was Jervis Stute's home, and a set of stairs had been built to allow him access. After the late unpleasantness, it is now considered haunted by most of the townsfolk and largely avoided. South of there is a large stone tower, apparently the remains of an old lighthouse from long ago. Scholars have flocked to the town to study it, hoping to learn more about the people of Thassalon that lived here ages ago. Now, if you watch the Thassalon video, this might strike you as a little odd, because in Thassalon's time, this wasn't a coast. This area would have been landlocked, so why would someone build a lighthouse here? Now, to be fair, the Runelords were all weirdos. I wouldn't put it past at least one of them to build a lighthouse somewhere just out of pure spite, but that's not what happened. This structure is not a lighthouse at all. It's the remains of a border deterrent that Alasnus, the Runelord of Wrath, built to keep Karzug, the Runelord of Greed, away from her territory. Charmingly named a Hellstorm Flume, these gigantic towers were topped with swirling storms of arcane fire that garrison spellcasters could use to scorch opposing armies from miles away. That runewell that caused all those earlier problems, yeah, that was part of this thing's power system. Good thing it can't go off anymore, right? Oh yeah, it's totally safe. The largest building in Sandpoint now is the newly built cathedral. Sandpoint's original place of worship was a modest-sized collection of shrines to 6 different gods, built around a courtyard with 7 large stones standing in a ring. This courtyard still forms the middle of the new cathedral, but the structure around it is much larger, with chapels for each of the 6 deities worshipped in town. Now, we've talked about Desna's worship a lot, since it was the result of the Varesian settlement with the Sandpoint founders, but 5 other gods were worshipped here as well: Gazra, Sarenrae, Abadar, Aristil, and Shelyn. Gazra, Sarenrae, Abadar, and Shelyn were each chosen by one of the founding families, while Aristil was chosen for the popularity among the common settlers. The current leader of the cathedral is Abstal Arzantis, a cleric of Desna and former acolyte under Father Tobin. A few additional acolytes serve various functions throughout the church. Just outside is the local graveyard, maintained by Nafar Vosk, a former smuggler turned redeemed Sarenrae cleric that keeps the place meticulously clean and maintained. Uptown also contains the town hall and local garrison. The current sheriff of Sandpoint is a Shoanti man named Baylor Hemlock. He gained the position just after the chopper killed the previous sheriff, and has held it ever since. He used to have a more traditional Shoanti name, but changed it to the Chelish translation in order to better fit in with the rest of the population. While it has won him some support, it's also driven a wedge between himself and his brother, who runs one of Sandpoint's inns. The town hall is home to all of Sandpoint's records and civil service offices, as well as the basement essentially serving as their bank. There have been a few plans throughout the years to build a proper bank, but none have ever gotten off the ground. The mayor of the town is Kendra Deverim, who has helped steer Sandpoint through their recent issues and hopes the success of the Swallowtail Festival will be the start of a new period of good times for the town. No one tell her that the town is about to start an adventure, because that never bodes well for your infrastructure. Near the old light is a beach full of garbage. Intentionally so, as the local waste collector Grovey and his various employed collectors have taken to simply dumping the town's waste here to be carried off by the sea. An efficient system, despite having several long-term problems. One that's unique to Galarian is the fact that the local Seven-Toes Goblin tribe has taken to sneaking here and scavenging whatever they can find. While they are just getting scraps and garbage, goblins are notorious for tinkering together horrible creations from things people wouldn't consider worth it. A good number of townsfolk, especially the Gazra worshippers, aren't happy with the situation, but they don't have a good alternative, so Junk Beach shall continue as advertised. Now that's the major uptown locations, so we'll head down south to just off the beach, where you can find the Sandpoint Glassworks that the Kaijitsu family runs. While neither of his local children are able to take over the business, Amiko doesn't want it, and Lanjiku wouldn't give it to Suto even if he did, Lanjiku continues to run the place himself. His main hope is likely that Amiko will change her mind one day, but until then he's stuck in the position. Halfway across town is quite possibly Sandpoint's strangest draw. As a merchant town on the edge of the frontier, it's the last place you'd expect to find a playhouse, let alone a large, prestigious one. It was financed entirely by its owner, a man named Sirdak Drokus. Sirdak was once a well-known performer in Magnamar and has extensive connections in the city. He uses these to get access to the most recent plays and performances from the big city a lot sooner than a frontier town normally would. He also uses the playhouse to highlight and bring exposure to local talent, with a lot of Sandpoint youth hoping to hit it big as actors here. Close by is the Tarandarok Academy, the town's local schoolhouse and orphanage. It's run by a retired wizard named Ilsari Gandithus, who uses the basement as a personal museum of sorts. The children he teaches and cares for have a million rumors about what's down there, but it's mostly just old adventuring knickknacks. He's actually perfectly willing to show it off to people if they ask nicely, but it's dangerous enough that children shouldn't be allowed down there unsupervised. Nearby is a large open square that hosts the Sandpoint markets. Most of the week it's empty, the perfect place for children to play games or horse around. But twice a week, vendors set up stalls and fill the place with goods from outlying farms and faraway cities. By custom, the farmers market happens at the start of the week, while the out-of-town merchants get in at the end of the week. Sandpoint isn't a place that gets a lot of luxury, and the selection here is pretty mundane and common, but it is good quality stuff. Across the square is the headquarters of the Sandpoint Merchants League. If you need to make any kind of deal with the merchant families or conduct more large-scale business, this is where you would go to do it. From there, they will likely send you to the glassworks or over to the riverside of the city. North of the bridge are the town's two mills, both owned by the Scarnettis. The lumber mill is farther upriver, while the grain mill is just downriver. Sandpoint used to have more grain mills, but mysterious fires have claimed each one of them. Rumors around town pin it on the Scarnettis, but nothing concrete has been proven. The Scarnettis probably have the worst reputation around town due to their family's violent actions against the local Varisians and general underhanded business tactics. Farther down the river, you have the Sandpoint Shipyard. Boasting 4 dry docks, the shipyard uses the abundant lumber from the mill to produce a good number of high-quality ships right on the mouth of the Sandpoint Bay. Given the town's lack of large-scale arms manufactory, it's likely the shipyard mostly produces commercial shipping boats, but we don't know entirely for sure. The Valdemar family still runs this shipyard, their oldest son Belver Valdemar running a very tight ship. As I mentioned earlier, to the south of town across the river we have 4 manor houses built for the 4 founding families. All 4 families still reside there, although only the Valdemar's founder is actually still alive. Though extravagant and fancy by local standards, these manors are pretty modest by big city standards. Sandpoint has a large variety of shops and amenities that a visitor or adventurer would want to use. We'll start with the inns and taverns, since we all know how much adventurers love those, and then move on to the amenities. In Uptown, we have the White Deer. The current building is brand new, the original having burned down with the old cathedral. The name comes from 2 large deer carved from white birch that stand at the front of the entrance. The White Deer is probably Sandpoint's largest and grandest inn, 3 stories high and with a dozen rooms available. Despite the size and quality of the rooms, prices are quite low, matching the smaller places like the Rusty Dragon. Part of the reason for this might be the gruff innkeeper, Garridan Viscali. A terse and serious Shawanti man whose parents moved to Sandpoint soon after its founding, Garridan struggles with a desire to connect with his Shawanti roots versus his familial duties in Sandpoint. His brother becoming the local sheriff and changing his name to more suit the Chelish language has driven a wedge between them as a result. But while Garridan might not be the best host, when it comes to room quality versus price, the White Deer is the best in town. Moving on along, we have Risa's Place. A small local tavern, it was run by Risa McGarvey for 30 years, though her age and failing eyesight means she's turned the running of the place over to her 3 children, Besk, Lanely, and Vodger. Risa is still a fixture of the place, mostly telling stories and keeping the atmosphere friendly. Risa's Place is the kind of tavern that mostly hosts locals who appreciate the cozy atmosphere and the ability to get away from outsiders. Contrasting it is the Cracktooth's Tavern, which caters to the younger, artistic crowd that the theater attracts. Cracktooth's Taproom has its own stage, which allows any amateur actor to get up and try their hand at entertaining the crowd. Jesk Cracktooth Barini is the bartender and has the face of a thug, but a sharp mind capable of biting political commentary if he can be coaxed up onto the stage. Among the fishers and dock workers of Sandpoint, the Hagfish is the most popular tavern. While the bartender Jaggy Quinn is a friendly enough fellow, the real draw is the titular hagfish, Nora, who lives in an aquarium tank by the bar. Nora's tank is the tavern's big gimmick, with anyone that can drink a mug of her tank water without losing their stomach winning a nice little purse of coin as well as the right to carve your name in the ceiling beam above the bar. Before you take the challenge, know that only 28 names grace that beam, despite the bar's 10 years in operation. The Hagfish also has plenty of game tables open for anyone looking to gamble or just drink in a room of rowdy fishermen. Sandpoint's oldest inn is also one of its most popular. The Rusty Dragon is the inn most travelers are likely to come across, being the first one anyone entering town through the well-traveled southern road will see. The tavern is named for a large iron sculpture of a dragon perched on the roof, pulling double duty as a lightning rod and decoration. As you can guess from the name and outdoors position, it's gotten quite rusty over the years. The tavern has gone through a few owners, but its most recent is Amiko Kaijitsu, who bought the place after returning from spending a year as an adventurer. Amiko's spicy exotic dishes, which draw from her Tian heritage, as well as her musical talent, always manage to draw a crowd. Though her father considers it beneath her and has put pressure on her to give up the inn and come home, Amiko stubbornly refuses. The Rusty Dragon is the most adventurer-friendly tavern in town, and likely the first place a group will want to put up their feet and have a bite before heading out on some brand new quest. The final tavern in Sandpoint is the Dive Bar. Named the Fatman's Feed Bag, this place has a reputation for nightly brawls and watered-down swill that will taste horrible but still get you drunk. Outwardly, the tavern is run by Gressel Tenawar, a hulking human man who looms over even the regular toughs that frequent the place. In actuality, the owner of the tavern is Jubarl Vishki, a leader of the local Skzarni gang. Like most gang leaders, Jubarl loves to keep a layer of protection between him and the law, so while Sheriff Hemlock has spent years trying to nail him, he's never come close. Now when it comes to amenities, Sandpoint has a wide selection of random shops for you to peruse. We'll hit them all nice and quick before we wrap up here. In Uptown, we have the Way North, a shop that specializes in selling maps to the local area, both land and sea. It's run by Vesnut Peru, a gnome man whose name I cannot take seriously. Down the street is a jeweler's shop owned by Maverkesk. That's really all we get for a description. It's a jewelry shop. That's his name. Moving on, there's an old building occupied by a sage and engineer named Brodert Quink. Trained in far-off Janderhof by dwarves, he feels like his intellectual contributions to the town are not being as appreciated as they should be. His current theory is that the old light is not a lighthouse, but an ancient Thessalonian weapon. The town thinks he's nuts. It's clearly a lighthouse and not a weapon that will one day go off on them. A foreshadowing is a literary device that... Last in Uptown is the locksmith Veloiker Bristlebeard, a dwarf that has run the shop since Sandpoint was founded. The local Skzarni would love to put him out of business or get him on their side, but Veloiker has steadfastly refused to budge on his principles. Now if you want some weapons or armor, then Sava's Armory is the place to go. Sava Bivaniki has all manner of weapons for sale, including strange and exotic ones like katanas and shurikens. The most extravagant thing in the shop is a magical repeating crossbow, which is too expensive for anyone local to afford, but if you're an adventurer who's got some money to spend... Now for leather goods, Lars Rovanki's tannery is the place to go. Lars is a highly efficient perfectionist, which means he'll produce good work fairly quickly, but you're still going to be in for a bit of a wait. Now if you need bespoke smithing work done, you've got the Red Dog Smithy, owned by Das Korvet. He does good work and knows his job, but is not the most pleasant person to converse with. If you need him, do yourself a favor and keep the conversation short and focused on his work. Now if you need medicinal herbs, then the Pillbug's Pantry is your stop. Oliver Pillbug Potiker cultivates a variety of plants and fungi for medicinal purposes. Of course, some plants have more sinister purposes, and Oliver would never deign to sell you that sort of thing before you give the proper passphrase. Just ask if any happy pillbugs have shown up lately, and he'll bring out the more interesting stock. If you prefer your healing in liquid form, you can buy potions and elixirs from Nisk Tander in the bottled solutions. Nisk is not the most meticulous brewer though, so there's a chance his brew won't actually work. Still, he's the only game in town, so beggars can't be choosers. One of the more unique locations in Sandpoint is the House of Blue Stones. Founded by a wandering monk named Enderrocky Sorn, it's currently run by his daughter, Sable Sorn, who inherited the place from her father when he passed away 7 years ago. A worshipper of Aurori, Sable keeps the building open as a meditation room and library for worshippers of the monk god. But outsiders will need to prove their serious commitment before she will let them see her sacred texts. The Sandpoint Savories is a bakery run by the Averton family, who suffered a tragic loss when the chopper took the life of Casp Averton, the local sheriff. His mother Alma hasn't recovered, leaving the bakery to her twin daughters Erica and Annika. Annika is fine with the arrangement, but Erica has been growing more and more restless at running a bakery. The Curious Goblin is the local bookstore, run by former adventurer and book lover Chask Hallidan. Spry and healthy for a man over 70, Chask cares more about sharing his love of books than having a profitable business, since most people in Sandpoint can't afford his more expensive tomes. The more intellectual locals can sometimes be found here, either chatting or reading in one of his large plush chairs. The general store is run by Ven Vinder, and is generally well stocked with basic goods. Ven will also sell alcohol to anyone that asks to see the wine cellar, but doesn't really advertise that service. Lately, he's been distracted by the antics of his eldest daughter, Katrine, which has ironically made him miss the even more brazen actions of his youngest daughter, Shayless. Now, Madame Mavashti's house is a strange place. Originally, it was built by the town as a concession to the Varisians as a place for one of their elders to live out the rest of her days, with the ownership reverting back to the town after she'd passed. Turns out Nishka Mavashti wasn't quite ready to die, so she's continued to live in this house supported by her extended family and the town of Sandpoint ever since it was built. Honestly, good for her. Live another 100 years, Queen. Nearby is the local grocer's hall run by Olmayer Devankus, which sells local produce and acts as a meeting hall for both local farmers and merchant guild members when they need a place to conduct business. Verna's Fine Clothing is a tailor shop run by the Ivaran Rinshin Povali. Her mother Verna raised her herself, the elven man that fathered her having been killed by goblins only days after she was born. Every year on her birthday, Rinshin would get a mysterious package of elven coin, toys, and a few other things from an unknown source. While the girl holds out hope it's somehow her surviving father, it's likely just distant relatives who feel responsible for her. Verna was one of the chopper's victims, and Rinshin has used the coin from these yearly gifts to expand the business in her mother's name, growing quite popular. Ween's Wagons is a wheelwright shop whose owner is a bit down on his luck. One of his children drowned last year, and now he and his wife are afraid of something happening to one of their other two kids. As a result, you can more often find Bilvar Ween at the tavern rather than at his shop. Now, if you want some protein in your diet, Sandpoint has two options. The Valdemar fish markets provide fresh catches every day. Run by Turch Sturgilus and his 5 sons, the locals treat the market as if it's his business, even though the Valdemars officially still run the place. But if you want land meat instead of sea meat, head on over to Chad Bivak at the Sandpoint Meat Market. Just don't believe some of the tall tales he tells you. To hear him tell it, he fought the chopper nearly to death and lost a finger for his troubles, but most think he just missed a cut one too many times. Now, if you have an animal companion, you'll want to head over to the Goblin Squash Stables. Run by Davarin Hosk, the stable is as much a display of how much he hates goblins as it is a business. Like, he has a string of dried goblin ears nailed to the front door. Personally, I'll be avoiding the place, but if you got a horse, that's where you put it. Now, for a town with several taverns, it's important that they have a good supply of alcohol, and most local alcohol comes from the Two Night Brewery. Established by two brothers, the brewery suffered a big loss when one brother, Wade Deverin, was killed by the chopper during his spree. Gavin Deverin hasn't fully recovered from the loss, and locals whisper that the drinks just don't taste quite right anymore. They'll avoid doing so in front of Gavin, though. They have a little bit of tact. Sandpoint has a boutique selling knickknacks, paddywhacks, and probably at least one dog bone. Halis Korvaski runs the shop and has a deep personal dislike for the Skzarni. While that's a moral stance, certainly, the attitude is just as likely to get her in trouble in long term as it is to do any good, so she'd probably best step it back, but I don't think she will. Now, if you're looking for a more companionable place to spend money, the Pixie's Kitten is the place to go. Kay Tesserani runs a classy establishment where her men and women are well paid and the bouncers are quick to throw out anyone who doesn't follow the rules. While some busybodies in town want the place shut down for moral reasons, Kay's reputation and the not-at-all secret romance with Sheriff Hemlock keeps it from going any farther than closed-door mutterings. Now, if you're looking for something weird, Vorvashali Voon might have it. Owner of the Feathered Serpent, Voon collects odd and magical items, selling them out on a whim. Definitely a character, his shop is the best place for adventurers who have random magic stuff to try and sell it, since Voon has connections in Magnamar willing to help him move goods. And lastly, we have the lovely and creatively named Hannah's, the local herbalist doctor run by Hannah Vellerton, an elven cleric and medicine woman who can perform a variety of services. She's best known as the town's midwife, as well as the woman to talk to if you want to avoid pregnancy altogether. She also provides the discreet service a young person might need if that prevention maybe comes just a little too late. And that's every major business in Sandpoint. It's a small town, but one with a lot of interconnected stories to tell. For a campaign, it has everything a group might need for their first level adventure. To me, Sandpoint is a great example of a starting town. There are quite a few things here that will grow to become important later on, and enough character for many parties to latch onto. As a central part of Rise of the Rune Lords, having a lot of detail to sink your teeth into gives a sense of home to return to between the different books. Thank you very much for taking a look at this town with me, Pathfinders. It's a lot of information about one town, no matter how important it will get. We're just about done setting the stage for Rise of the Rune Lords, which begins on the day of the Swallowtail Festival. So stay tuned, Pathfinders, because things are about to kick off hard. In the meantime, I'd personally appreciate it if you could do all the fun YouTube things, and possibly check out the Patreon for early video releases and more if I can get people getting at the higher tiers. Getting even a little support would help me make these videos a little bit better a little more often. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, explore, report, and cooperate.